Okay, so as we began to talk about in class, this chapter really is kind of a review. So one of the questions that I had was the text states that endurance athletes have greater aerobic power because of increased mitochondrial concentration. Why do you believe this is so? So they have greater power because they have greater mitochondria. When a person starts exercising, the mitochondria, remember, are the workhorse or the workhouses of ATP production. And so when somebody starts exercising, and specifically somebody who's a regular, consistent exerciser, they produce more mitochondria. Their body generates more mitochondria because it's realizing, hey, I need to generate more energy because I'm doing more work. So they have a denser, greater mitochondria concentration, and ultimately allows them to produce greater aerobic power. So looking at this graph that I have up here, you're going to notice, all right, so when you do heavy exercise, you've got a limited um, amount of energy. So here you've got your percentage of glycogen content. So when you've got zero exercise, you've got 100% glycogen content. And so if you're doing heavy exercise, notice you cannot do heavy exercise for a long period of time without running out of your glycogen. Moderate exercise, you can work out longer, and then very light exercise. So when you start talking to people about exercise, we know that glycogen becomes body fat, and so we definitely don't want them doing light exercise, right? Because look, they're hardly using any of their glycogen supplies. Moderate exercise obviously is using glycogen, and then of course heavy exercise, you're using large amounts of glycogen. So hopefully you can see here that the lighter the exercise, the less glycogen, the heavier the exercise, the more glycogen. Why is that? Because you need glycogen to produce ATP, and ATP is ultimately energy. So when you start looking at, so here we talk a little bit about aerobic power. It is the speed at which ATP is produced. And obviously, if I'm an endurance athlete, I want a lot of glycogen, a lot of ATP production. All right, so that's what I mean when I talk about aerobic power. We do this by increased mitochondrial concentration, enhanced delivery of O2. So you think about your heart. All right, so if I can get oxygen to the mitochondria, that means I can generate ATP because I need O2 in an aerobic endurance athlete, which means I can break down glycogen, I can break down fat, and I can then exercise for a longer period of time. How do I enhance my delivery of O2? I have a good heart. And endurance athletes, the more you exercise, the stronger your heart is, the greater, more efficient you are at delivering oxygen to the necessary cells. And then the efficient use of fuel. All right, the more you exercise, the greater your body becomes at adapting, utilizing the fuel, the glycogen, and even the fat. In fact, endurance athletes have a better utilization of fat than just the everyday person. So what are the goals of endurance athletes? It's to optimize muscle and liver glycogen, promote efficient conversion of glucose and fatty acid into fuel so that we can continue to exercise if we're an endurance athlete. Find a balance of calorie intake, so how many calories should I be consuming, and avoid creating a gastrointestinal distress. We talked about that early on in the semester, where if you have too much sugar or too much glycogen, your body's going to try to dilute that in essence, and so you tend to have an upset stomach. So two goals, let me move this out of the way here. So two major goals of fueling for endurance. So the two goals are to optimize glycogen and ensure ready use of glycogen. When you're working with an endurance athlete, that should be a thought. Somebody comes to you and says, hey, I'm an endurance athlete. These are the two things you want to do. Optimize glycogen and ensure that they have glucose available to them. And that depends on the frequency, intensity, duration, and type. This is basic wellness principles, right? So if a person is exercising 2 times a day, they need to make sure that they have a ready supply of glucose so that they can optimize this glycogen supply. If they're only exercising 3 times a week, you know what? A regular meal is going to be sufficient for them. What is their intensity at which they're working? What is it they're doing? Are they doing high intensity type of work, or are they doing long, slow endurance type of exercise? All right, so my little video clip here, which is the carb rinse. So what are the advantages of consuming carbs during exercise? 2 advantages. One is metabolic, and 2 is neurological. So there's a metabolic advantage because now I am giving my body an immediate supply of glucose, which I can use immediately. All right, I don't have to go to my fat supplies, break it down, and then I get energy. And the other advantage is neurological. So neurologically, I am enhancing, it's not that you enhance the neurological system, but you provide the energy needed for the neurological system to function at its most efficiency. Because remember, your brain is the one thing we got to keep fueling so that we are active, we are alert, and we are responding. And so if I give an athlete glucose, then it can keep their central nervous system functioning to its most efficiency. And then little video talks about carb mouth rinse and how that actually triggers a person's response to utilize glucose. It's really interesting research. And then he gives some examples of when somebody could be using a mouth rinse. What does a dose-dependent response mean? Is depending on the dosage that is given will depend on the response that a person has. So when they talk about a 60 to 80 grams per hour dose response, 60 to 80 grams is the dose within an hour, help that person in an endurance type of event. All right, so that's just the very bare bones of endurance and carbohydrates. In the next video, I'll talk a little bit about strength athletes.